Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown, and my Yanni friend over there.
Just jumping right into it, are we?
Yes. That's Matthew Stockton. How are you?
Can you hold for 1 second? I didn't know we're jumping right in. I got to pee. Sing a song for a minute.
See what I have to deal with. Well, let's fast forward in time. Alrighty, Matthew is back from a pee, so we can start the show now. Yeah, see how I edited that? I edited all of the actual peeing sound out that people would have heard. Anyway, enough of this tomfoolery. We're here to tell a story. Let's do it.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Our content is often intense, and some listeners may find it disturbing. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We are ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
Winnipeg's West End sits just outside the downtown core. It is a dense grid of older apartment blocks, corner stores, and rooming houses pressed up against one another along streets that run straight and flat in every direction. In the early 2010s, a stretch of Ellis Avenue near Sherbrooke Street had a name that didn't appear on any city map. The women who worked there called it the Street of Tears. 3 women vanished from within a few blocks of that corner over the span of 5 months between the fall of 2011 and the winter of 2012. The first was 31 years old. The second was 25 and 5 months pregnant. The third was 18. All 3 were indigenous. All 3 were battling addiction. And, according to reporting, all 3 were working the street-level sex trade to survive. Their families reported them missing. They put up posters. They walked the streets themselves asking questions that nobody seemed to want to answer. They called police, and they waited. 2 of the women were found wrapped in plastic, discarded near dumpsters in back alleys not far from where they had been last seen. The third has never been found. Their names were Tanya Nepinak, Carolyn Sinclair, and Lorna Blacksmith. As reporting about who these women were is sparse, we will do our best to honor them by digging into what happened to them and what a system built to protect them did and didn't do when they needed it most. You're listening to Dark Poutine episode 431, Street of Tears. The Crimes of Shawn Cameron Lamb. Tanya Nepinak was 31 years old and a mother of two. She came from Minegozebe, Anishinaabe, known in English as Pine Creek First Nation, a community of several hundred people situated on the eastern shore of Lake Winnipegosis, roughly 700 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg. The nearest city of any size is Dauphin, hours away on gravel roads cutting through boreal forest and farmland. Tanya's family was well known and respected in that community. Her grandfather, the late Chief Daniel Nepinak, had been a signatory to Wabung, a landmark 1971 document produced by the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood that laid out a comprehensive vision for First Nations self-determination in Canada. The word Wabung means our tomorrows in Ojibwe. Chief Daniel Nepinak was an original member of the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood, and his name was on one of the first most significant political documents in the history of First Nations governance in this country. In 2011, Tanya was living in Winnipeg on Sherbrooke Street in the West End. She had two kids. Her Aunt Sue Caribou, who had lost 7 members of her own family to murder and 2 more to disappearance, described Tanya as someone who always came home. She was reliable in that way. She always told people where she was going. Carolyn Sinclair was 25 when she disappeared. She was from Matthias Colum Cree Nation. It's a fly-in community on Pukatawagan Lake in northern Manitoba, accessible only by air or a winter road that closes each spring when the ice finally thaws. No permanent road connects it to the rest of the province, and the community's population is roughly 2,000 people. Carolyn, too, had moved to Winnipeg and was living in the West End. Her sister Amanda had made the same journey years earlier and knew the city and its risks well. By the time Carolyn disappeared, Amanda was sober and off the street. It was clear in the way Amanda spoke of Carolyn that she loved her sister deeply. Quote, "She was very outgoing. She was a very lovable person," Amanda told CBC News. "She had a good personality where, she stuck on you." End quote. A friend of Carolyn's, Jennifer Tickborn, told reporters, though Carolyn lived a high-risk lifestyle, it was not how she should be remembered. Quote, "She was a caring person. She was a nice girl. She would help anybody in need before she would even herself." End quote. Carolyn was battling an addiction to crack cocaine and working the street-level sex trade to support herself and her habit. In the early winter of 2011, Carolyn was 5 months pregnant with her third child. Her family knew about the pregnancy, and they were worried she wasn't going to get the prenatal care she needed, and they wanted her to come home. Lorna Blacksmith was 18 years old. She came from Pimi-Chikamak, also known as Cross Lake, a Cree-speaking people whose traditional territory sits around Sipiwesk Lake in the boreal forest, roughly 500 kilometers north of Winnipeg. The community's name means a people of rivers and lakes, and the great river Kichisipi runs through their land. Young Lorna lived for a while with her aunt in Cross Lake before later joining her mother in Pukatawagan, where the family tried to build a more stable life. Her childhood was marked by frequent moves, instability, and periods in foster care after her mother struggled to cope with Lorna's drinking and anger. In the summer of 2011, Lorna moved with her family to Winnipeg's West End. She enrolled at Gordon Bell High School, where she showed flashes of curiosity and insight in her schoolwork. In one English assignment on the poetry of Langston Hughes, she reflected on perseverance, writing, quote, "Life's hard, and we all do things to get us through life. All you gotta do is keep going and not look back," end quote. She also took classes that included child development and parenting, and she had recently taken up drumming. Hoping to encourage her daughter to stay in school, Lorna's mother even bought her a car, promising it would be hers once she attended classes regularly. By the end of 2011, however, Lorna was struggling with alcohol and drug addiction, including crystal meth, and she had dropped out of school. She was spending increasing amounts of time in Winnipeg's West End, where she survived through the street-level sex trade. Despite the turmoil in her life, she remained close to her mother. The two spoke and texted constantly, and Lorna Blacksmith would often drive across the city to bring her daughter food, cigarettes, or whatever she needed. On the evening of January 11, 2012, before Lita dropped Lorna off at a house on Toronto Street, Lorna tried to reassure her. She promised that she was finished with drinking and that it would be her last night out. Those were among the last words her mother heard from her before Lorna disappeared. Tanya Nepinak, though, was the first to vanish. She'd left home on Sherbrooke Street with $5 in her hand. She told her mother she was walking a few blocks to Papa Guido's, a pizza restaurant on Ellis Avenue at Home Street. She was wearing a black hat, a short black coat, and jeans. She had her first name tattooed on the fingers of her left hand and a red birthmark on the left side of her forehead. She was 5'2" and weighed around 100 pounds. She was a tiny girl. She did not come back that night. The next morning, Sue Caribou received a phone call from her sister. Quote, "My sister called me and said, 'Tanya didn't come home,'" Caribou told CBC News. "And I said, 'Not like Tanya, she always comes home,'" end quote. Caribou asked whether the police had been called. They had. Officers told the family to wait 24 hours. That old chestnut.
Yeah, every missing persons case is that moment where the family knows something's wrong before anyone else does. And we hear it over and over again on the show. Not because they're psychic, just because they know the person, right? This is their family.
Mm-hmm.
Tanya wasn't somebody who'd vanished for days without contact, and people closest to her recognized immediately something is wrong. But it just makes me wonder why the police told this family to wait when I'm sure they didn't tell other families to wait.
Yes.
I think potentially there's some underlying racism there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say it because I don't know, but it just feels like it to me.
Well, I'll say it for you. It's probably because she was an indigenous person who had some struggles. Anyway, her family knew better. Sue Caribou didn't wait for the police to act. She told her sister to find the biggest photograph of Tanya she could and called the local television station herself. Cameras arrived that day. By the following morning, police were at the family's door conducting interviews. Funny how that works. Tanya's sister Gail told reporters that Tanya called their mother every single day. Quote, "There's not one day she'll go without phoning my mom," Gail said. "There's no way she'd just walk away." End quote. A missing persons investigation was opened. Family members put up posters across the West End. But there were no witnesses and no surveillance footage placing Tanya beyond the few blocks between her front door and the restaurant she had told her mother she was going to. After 9 days, she remained missing. 3 months later, on December 31st, 2011, Carolyn Sinclair called her family. She told them she would be home for Christmas. That day was the last time anyone heard from Carolyn. Her family took action immediately. Amanda Sinclair, Carolyn's sister, walked the streets of the West End, attaching missing person posters to telephone poles and business windows, as well as approaching the women who worked the same corners Carolyn did. She asked them questions. "Did you know my sister? When was the last time you saw her? Did you see anything suspicious? Who was with her?" Quote, "Somebody's out there who's got to know," Amanda told CBC News. "Even if it's just that one person, eventually that person will break down," end quote. The family held a vigil. They gave interviews. A missing persons file was opened, and 3.5 months passed. On March 31st, 2012, a passerby noticed blood seeping into the alley behind an apartment complex on the 700 block of Notre Dame Avenue between Toronto and Victor Streets. There, police found a body near a dumpster at the back of the building. The woman had been wrapped in plastic and she'd been there a while. She was carrying an unborn child. 2 days later, they identified the body as that of Carolyn Sinclair. It had been 106 days since she disappeared. Amanda Sinclair released 2 balloons at a vigil near the alley a few days later, one for Carolyn and one for the baby.
Yeah, and that hits differently when you stop and think about it. A lot of victims are numbers in case files, but every homicide creates a future that never gets to happen. And Carolyn's case, there's this whole second life that never even got a chance to begin, right? And, we do the shows and then the newer ones, when there's more recent one, it gets exhausting. You're like, really the same thing again? Of people not being heard and people not being cared about. It gets me sad, man.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah, me too. Lorna Blacksmith was still missing. 5 months had passed since her mother, Lita, had dropped her off at that house on Toronto Street after Lorna promised she was finished with drinking and wanted to turn her life around. Tanya Nepinak's family still wondered where she was. Every day that passed made the waiting harder. Unlike Carolyn's family, the Nepinaks and Blacksmiths had no answers about their missing loved ones. As the weeks went by, police began looking more closely at what had happened in Winnipeg's West End. 3 Indigenous women had disappeared within months of one another. 1 had been found dead, and 2 more were still missing. Investigators weren't the only ones noticing the pattern. A grassroots social media group called Red Circle Alert created a Facebook page drawing attention to the disappearances of Tanya Nepinak, Carolyn Sinclair, and Lorna Blacksmith. The group pointed out all 3 women had ties to northern Manitoba, had disappeared from the same area of Winnipeg, and had been living similarly vulnerable lives. Indigenous leaders renewed calls for a public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women in Manitoba. The federal government declined. Behind the scenes, police had also begun focusing on a man who lived only a few blocks away. Shawn Cameron Lamb was not his name at birth. He was born Daryl Docus in 1959 on the Amjinung First Nation near Sarnia, Ontario. He was around 1 year old when child welfare authorities removed him from his teenage mother's care and transferred him to a non-Indigenous adoptive family near Barrie, Ontario. This was not unusual at the time. Between the early 1960s and the mid-1980s, Canadian child welfare agencies removed an estimated 20,000 Indigenous children from their families and placed them with non-Indigenous households in what became known as the 60s Scoop. The program operated on the assumption that Indigenous children would have better lives away from their communities. The Parole Board in Canada, in its own documentation on Lamb decades later, noted plainly what his childhood had produced. He had been subjected to individual and systemic racism, lost his family, his community, and his culture, and suffered physical, sexual, and psychological abuse at the hands of the adoptive family that was supposed to protect him. According to court documents, Lamb attempted suicide at age 10 or 11 by mixing a handful of painkillers with soda. He started drinking at 9 years old. By 16, he was a heavy drinker, and he told the court that he'd been a drug addict since age 12. His criminal record began in 1979 when he was 20 years old. Over the next 3 decades across Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, and Manitoba, he accumulated 109 convictions. Robbery, forgery, fraud, theft, assault, carrying weapons, assaulting police officers, possessing stolen property, uttering threats, breaking and entering, and breaching court orders. In 1992, he served a 4-year sentence in Alberta for sexual assault. In a court submission, Lamb himself stated that he had spent close to 30 years of his life in one form of custody or another. 45 of his 109 convictions were in Manitoba, all after 2002. In 2010, a judge handed him a 19-month sentence for 16 charges, including assault and robbery, while acknowledging on the record that Lamb had one of the biggest criminal histories she had ever seen. His parole had been revoked or denied 5 times since 2001. By 2011, Lamb was living in a rooming house apartment on Simcoe Street in Winnipeg's West End. He was 52 years old, deep into a crack cocaine addiction, and 4 blocks from the corner of Ellis and Sherbrooke. That same month, Lorna Blacksmith disappeared. A 29-year-old woman named Denise, a sex trade worker who used crack cocaine, ended up in Lamb's apartment on a frigid January night, looking for a warm place to get high. She told CBC News that Lamb attacked her. She fought back, screaming, kicking, and punching, and got out of the apartment and down the stairs. She went to police. According to Denise, they did not follow up. She entered a sobriety program shortly afterward, driven in part by the disappearance of her friend, Carolyn Sinclair. In May 2012, Lamb was charged with a separate sexual assault. He was released, but he was on the police's radar.
Yeah, that's a phrase they're going to come back to, is I'm like, on their radar.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when authorities say someone was on their radar, what they're really saying is they knew he existed.
Mm.
The harder question is whether knowing and acting on anything was actually the same thing.
Of course, after looking at this guy's history, how could he not be a suspect in these disappearances, and the one absolutely that was a murder at this point?
Yeah.
Within weeks, the investigation would take a dramatic and terrible turn. More after a quick break. And we're back at the halfway point. Matthew, thoughts so far?
You know, as we're getting into this, like whenever we get the halfway point, it's sometimes hard because I don't want to give too much away, but it's a good opportunity for me to ramble on a little bit. And what bothers me here isn't Shawn Lamb. In a way, you know, guys like Shawn Lamb exist. They always have. What bothers me is what we're going to get into of like how many warning signs and how many things are in plain view, how many hundreds of convictions and histories of violence and sexual assaults and fresh charges go on and on and on, and how somebody just keeps walking the streets.
Yep, that's this story.
You know, it doesn't mean the police could have predicted these murders would happen, and it's not how the world works, but this whole story raises that difficult question again, and that's at what point does a person stop being merely known to the system and start being treated as a serious and ongoing threat?
Yep, exactly, and in this case, it's too late.
You know, and that's when people hear the phrase like we're talking about before the break, on the radar, kind of sounds reassuring, but to the families of the victims, it's not reassuring at all. What they hear is he was visible, he was known.
Yeah.
And the next natural is wonder why nobody managed to stop him.
It's hard to say, okay, we're tough on crime and all that kind of stuff. And then you have this kind of person walking around doing these things for years, over 100 convictions.
Yeah.
Bizarre. This guy had more than 100 convictions. I don't get it. Some of them seriously violent. How is this guy walking around and free enough to kill 3 women? This one fries my brain a bit. So, on the evening of June 21st, 2012, Winnipeg police arrested Shawn Lamb during an investigation into the serious sexual assault of a 36-year-old woman in the city's North End. It was the second time in 6 weeks he'd been taken into custody on a sexual offense. The second time in weeks. The first arrest had resulted in charges and his release. This time, investigators weren't letting him walk away. While sitting in custody, Lamb told detectives he had information about a body. Then he stopped talking. Police had a man with a lengthy history of violence sitting in an interview room, hinting that he knew something about one of the city's most troubling investigations. Yeah, we're both very glad that they found Lorna. Police deposited $1,500 into Lamb's jail canteen account in exchange for continuing the interviews. They would later insist the money wasn't a payment for confession. They said it was payment for information. The distinction would become one of the most controversial aspects of the case. The information Lamb provided confirmed what investigators had already feared about Lorna Blacksmith's disappearance, and it led them to another location only a few blocks away, where they found her body.
Yeah, but the payment for information thing is very uncomfortable, isn't it?
Well, we saw it with Clifford Olson. They did the same thing with him, $10,000 per body.
Yeah, because on one hand, that information brought the family answers that they might not have received. But on the other hand, if police start rewarding information, every statement comes with an extra question attached to it. And that question is the person telling the truth because it's true or because they have something to gain? And it's just a slippery slope of paying perpetrators for information. It's just gross. It creates this precedent of not telling until there's something to be gained, right? It's like,
right.
How about just being a human being, a decent human being, so loved ones can find the remains of their dead family members that you murdered, as opposed to getting something from it? It's just disgusting.
Following Lamb's directions, in the backyard of a home in the 700 block of Simcoe Street, officers found the remains of 18-year-old Lorna Blacksmith. She'd been missing since January 11th, and like Carolyn Sinclair, her body had been wrapped in plastic before being hidden near a garbage bin. The location was only a few feet from the rooming house where Shawn Lamb had been living. Within days, detectives began notifying families that they had arrested a suspect in the deaths of Tanya Nepinak, Carolyn Sinclair, and Lorna Blacksmith. On June 24th, 3 days after the arrest, detectives drove to the homes of 3 families in Winnipeg's West End. Each family received a visit within hours of one another. For Tanya Nepinak's father, Bert, the knock on the door ended the last thread of hope he had been holding. Quote, "I thought Tanya was still alive," he told reporters afterward. "I always thought Tanya was alive." Her sister Gail said arriving at certainty felt nothing like she'd imagined. Quote, "It feels like closure to us," she said, "but not in a good way." End quote. The following morning, June 25th, Police Chief McCaskill stepped before the cameras for a press conference. Shawn Cameron Lamb, 52, was charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of Tanya Jane Nepinak, Carolyn Sinclair, and Lorna Blacksmith. Second-degree murder, as we're aware, in Canada carries a mandatory life sentence with parole eligibility no sooner than 10 years. That evening on the steps of the Manitoba Legislature, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Derek Nepinak, who shared a surname with Tanya but was not a direct relative, stood alongside other First Nations leaders and called for a national public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. Manitoba Kiiwetinoong Okanagan Grand Chief David Harper made the same demand. 300 people marched to the legislature in support. The federal government at the time, led by Stephen Harper and the Conservative Party, declined the inquiry. Within days of the arrest, police launched a physical search of the neighborhood. Tanya Nepinak was still missing. Approximately 20 officers worked a defined perimeter, Elise and Notre Dame Avenues, Maryland and Arlington Streets, going yard to yard asking residents for permission to search sheds and outbuildings. Winnipeg police also set up a national tip line and contacted forces in Quebec, Alberta, and other provinces to determine whether Lamb could be linked to unsolved cases elsewhere. No additional charges resulted. The search for Tanya Nepinak presented a difficult problem. Police ultimately came to believe that her body had been placed in a garbage bin, picked up by a city collection truck, and taken to the Brady Road landfill on the southern edge of Winnipeg. In October 2012, officers began searching a designated section of the site. The search ran for 6 days. They found nothing and called it off. Tanya's family received word from a family member that Lamb had told them her body was somewhere near a river. Family members searched riverbanks on their own while calling police to redirect efforts there. "It makes me mad," Gail Nepinak told CBC News, "that there's information out there already and they're not even going about it." Lamb, now held at the Winnipeg Remand Center, awaiting trial, did not go quiet. He reached out to the Winnipeg Free Press for an interview, telling the paper he hoped the killers of dozens of women in Manitoba would be caught. "It's a sad thing for the victims and their loved ones," he said. He denied involvement in any unsolved homicides beyond the 3 charges he was facing and said he had voluntarily provided DNA not to include himself but to exclude himself. He spoke about his conditions at the remand center, where he said he spent 23.5 hours a day in a segregated maximum security cell. When CBC News sat down with Lamb for 30 minutes at the remand center, he spoke about the women he had known on the streets of the West End. Women working the sex trade, women with no identification, women whose disappearances, he said, often went unreported for days or not at all. "Maybe 2 out of 10 don't even get reported," he told CBC, "especially if they're in their adult years, over 20 or whatever, and they're estranged from their family and have a kid in the system." End quote. He said the women he knew distanced themselves from their families, that many had no ID, no purse, nothing to trace them back to anyone. It would be difficult, he said, to convince police a missing woman like that even existed. End quote. He also wrote letters from his cell. Vanessa Briere was 17 years old when her body was found in a field on the outskirts of Winnipeg in 2007. Her case, unsolved. A family member who wrote to Lamb asking whether he had any information. He wrote back saying he had not known her and their paths had never crossed. Months later, a second letter arrived, this one unsolicited, suggesting he might have information after all. The family member who received it never opened it, and she handed it directly to CBC News. It's unclear what became of the letter, but we can probably assume it's in the hands of the police. By early 2013, Lamb was telling a Winnipeg newspaper that he had information on 5 additional killings beyond the 3 he was charged with. The claim sent a fresh wave of anguish through Tanya Nepinak's family. Quote, "It was mind-blowing," Gail Nepinak told CBC News. "It was emotional," end quote. She said she wasn't sure whether to believe him. Quote, "Police need to do whatever they need to do," she said. Criminologist Stephen Egger assessed Lamb's pattern of communication from jail with clinical precision. Quote, "I think there's an attempt at empathy here," Egger told CBC News, "but I think the writer has evidenced, particularly in the second letter, what psychiatrists call antisocial personality disorder, or what the general public would view as a psychopath. He's saying, pay attention to me, because if you treat me right, I may tell you what happened to your friend or your loved one," end quote. Amanda Sinclair had a simpler read. Quote, "Why is he coming forward now after all this?" she said. "What's he trying to prove?" End quote. The case against Lamb carried its own complications. His defense lawyer, Martin Glazer, raised the $1,500 payment directly, arguing that the confession had effectively been purchased, that Lamb had receipts to prove it, and that if Lamb chose to fight the confession in court, there was a strong argument it would be thrown out. Glazer told the court plainly, without the confession there was no evidence linking Lamb to the killings. The Crown knew it. The resulting negotiations would define everything that came next. By the time the case reached a Winnipeg courtroom in the fall of 2013, the Crown and defense had been working toward a deal for months. The mechanics of it were straightforward, if deeply uncomfortable. Shawn Lamb would plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter in the deaths of Carolyn Sinclair and Lorna Blacksmith. In exchange, the charges would be reduced from second-degree murder. The third charge, second-degree murder in the death of Tanya Nepinak, would be addressed separately. The agreement also reached beyond the homicide charges. As we've mentioned, in June 2012, the same month Lamb was charged in the 3 deaths, he was also charged with sexual assault, sexual interference, and procuring sexual services of a person under the age of 18. Those charges arose from allegations involving a 14-year-old girl who had run away from home and had been living on the streets when she encountered Lamb and ended up in his apartment. As part of the plea negotiations that secured Lamb's guilty pleas in the homicide cases, Winnipeg police approached the girl and her family and urged them not to pursue those charges. The mother of one of the complainants later told CBC News what investigators said to them. Quote, "If we did pursue it, he would not plead guilty to anything and it would draw everything out. Basically, what she said to us was that this was the only guarantee he would go to jail." End quote. Sources confirm that at least 2 other women were also asked to recant statements about being sexually assaulted by Lamb as part of the same deal. All of them complied.
This is one of the hardest parts of the story for me. Imagine being a victim and told that your case needs to disappear because it helps secure a larger conviction somewhere else.
We saw that with Robert Picton's victims' families as well. They only charged him with 6.
The legal logic makes sense, but from the victim side of the table, it has to feel like justice is something being negotiated around you rather than for you.
Yeah. I mean, they wanted answers for the most serious crimes, but there's also those uncomfortable questions about the bottom line and whether or not it was worth it for the Crown to put their money where their mouth is for a trial. How much did they have on this guy? Ugh. The morning of November 14, 2013, Shawn Lamb appeared in a court of Queen's Bench in Winnipeg. He was 54 years old. He wore a gray jumpsuit and shackles. He stood and entered guilty pleas to 2 counts of manslaughter. Crown Prosecutor Sheila Lindbergh and defense lawyer Martin Glazer presented the facts of the 2 killings to the court. The families of Carolyn Sinclair and Lorna Blacksmith sat in the gallery and listened. The court heard that Lamb had met Carolyn Sinclair at a drug house in the West End in late 2011. They bought crack cocaine together and went back to his apartment on Simcoe Street to smoke it. He claimed an argument had broken out in his bathroom. Lamb struck Sinclair in the head with an axe handle 3 or 4 times. He then strangled her with his hands. Lamb left her body in the bathroom for 2 days before wrapping it in plastic and carrying it to the alley behind the building, where he left it near a dumpster. He claimed he had no idea she was 5 months pregnant. The court heard that Lamb had met Lorna Blacksmith about 2 weeks later while buying drugs. He invited her to his apartment. They smoked crack together. An argument broke out. Lamb strangled Blacksmith with a television cord. He then attempted to revive her with CPR. When he couldn't, he went out to buy more drugs. And later that day, he wrapped her body in plastic and carried it to the backyard on Simcoe Street a few feet from his front door and left it there. The family members of both women broke down in tears as the facts were read into the record. Several members got up and left the room. Glazer rose to make submissions on behalf of his client. He told the court the judge should consider that Lamb's guilty plea had spared the families from a trial. He read 3 letters of apology Lamb had written, one to the public and one to the Blacksmith family and another to the Sinclair family. In the letter to the Blacksmith family, Lamb described Lorna as a beautiful person and a beautiful spirit. Quote, "My words will never be enough," he wrote. "I'm a rotten drug addict, yet I will try and seek and find peace and closure, knowing I take responsibility for my actions. The tragedy and loss I have brought upon you, I am so deeply sorry." End quote. Of Carolyn Sinclair, he wrote, quote, "Every day I pray for Carolyn, and always will. I am so sorry." End quote. Moments after the submissions concluded and before Justice Rick Saul could respond, Lamb stood up and told the court he wanted to withdraw his guilty pleas. Lamb took issue with the report describing him as what he called a psychopath. He now wanted a trial. A man seated with Lorna Blacksmith's mother stood up from the gallery and shouted at Lamb, calling him a monster and telling him to take responsibility. A sheriff escorted the man out. A woman left the room in tears. Justice Saul clarified the record. The report did not call Lamb a psychopath. It described antisocial personality disorder. They were not the same thing. After a brief conference with Glazer, Lamb sat back down and re-entered his guilty pleas. Lamb then addressed the court directly. He said he had been a drug addict since age 12 and that people could not understand what he had been through. He said he was sorry, that he had remorse, that he understood the pain of the victims' families, and he said he hated what he had become. Quote, "Basically, I turn into a monster at times," he told the court. "That is not me." End quote. Some of the victims' families got up and left the room as he spoke.
But it is you.
Yeah, if you look carefully, his statements are just excuses and not really taking responsibility.
If violence happened only once, maybe you could separate the act from the person or whatever. You still can't do that, but, people learn a lesson, all of that stuff. But when somebody leaves a trail of victims behind them for decades, eventually we have to accept that what they repeatedly do is who they are. And at some point, that distinction stops meaning very much to the people that they've... It really boils my frog. I'm going to start using that when people start using addictions as their get-out-of-jail-free card.
Yep, this boils my frog too, yeah.
It's with the previous episode, Phil Hartman's wife, right? Like, there's a lot of people, oh, she was addicted. She's a grown-ass woman making choices, and this guy's a grown-ass man making choices and killing people.
Yep. Justice Saul accepted the joint sentencing recommendation. He sentenced Shawn Lamb to 2 consecutive 10-year terms, 20 years in total, minus 2 years credit for the time already served in custody. He would be eligible to apply for parole in 9. Saul noted that the sentence was comparable to what Lamb would have received had he been convicted of second-degree murder at trial. He added that Lamb would likely spend a portion of his sentence in solitary confinement. The joint recommendation also called for Lamb to serve his sentence outside the Prairie Provinces, given the high-profile nature of the case and the credible threat to his safety from other prisoners. Lamb left the courtroom after the sentence was announced, showing no emotion as he looked at the victims' families. Outside the court, Amanda Sinclair told reporters what she thought of the outcome. Quote, "My sister is never going to return," she said. "I was hoping he would get what he deserved, and that's not much for taking 2 lives. I think he would do it all over again if he could." End quote. 1 week later, on November 22, 2013, Crown Prosecutor Sheila Lindbergh appeared before the court on the remaining charge. The second-degree murder charge against Lamb in the death of Tanya Nepinak was stayed. Quote, "Based on the evidence to date, and after a careful reassessment of all the evidence," Lindbergh told the court, "the Crown has determined there is no reasonable likelihood of conviction at this time. Should new evidence be discovered, the case can be reviewed for possible future prosecution." End quote. Tanya's family was informed after it happened. Her sister Gail described what it felt like. Quote, "I thought at least my sister would get something out of it," she told reporters, and referring to Lamb's lighter sentence due to his plea deal, she said, "It was like a stab in the heart for those families, including us." End quote. Lamb's 14-year-old victim later chose to be identified. Lauren Chopek spoke publicly about what happened in 2018, 5 years after Lamb's sentence. She was 21 years old by then. Quote, "It was so easy," she told CBC News. "When I met Shawn Lamb, it was just a man on the street that I asked for a cigarette. It's so easy for us to walk into dangerous situations. We're at risk because people drive by us, 14, 15-year-old girls, and they look down on us. They don't question why we're there, why we're hurting, and that's what keeps us at risk. The judgment, that holds us down, making us feel less worthy than we already feel. So we stay here." End quote. Tanya Nepinak's body was still missing. Her killer, if it was Lamb, had not faced justice. The charge was just gone. Shawn Lamb was transferred out of Manitoba to serve his sentence as the joint recommendation had requested. He was denied parole multiple times after first becoming eligible in 2022. The Parole Board of Canada's own records documented what assessments of him had found. He presented a high imminent risk of violence toward a partner, an above-average risk of sexual reoffending, and a problematic history of breaching the conditions of his releases. The same documents noted his 60-scoop history as a mitigating factor. Both things sit in the record together. On November 6, 2025, Shawn Lamb became eligible for statutory release and was freed from prison under strict conditions. Although he'd been sentenced in November 2013, the calculation included the time he had spent in custody since his arrest in June 2012, so by November 2025, he'd served approximately 13 years and 4 months, 2/3 of his 20-year sentence. Under Canadian federal law, most offenders serving fixed-length sentences are released under supervision after serving 2/3 of their sentence unless authorities establish grounds to keep them in custody until the sentence expires. Statutory release did not mean Shawn Lamb had completed his sentence. He remained subject to federal supervision and could be returned to custody until the full 20-year sentence expired. Lamb was 66 years old. The parole board imposed several conditions, including that he live in a community-based residential facility, a halfway house, for at least 6 months, immediately report all friendships and intimate relationships to his parole supervisor, and obtain approval for any proposed residence. He was placed in a facility in Ontario rather than in Manitoba, his hunting ground. The families of Carolyn Sinclair and Lorna Blacksmith were not informed by authorities ahead of the release. Lorna's sister, Paige, who had been 8 years old when her sister was killed, found out through a phone call. Then the tears came. Quote, "I just bursted out," she told CBC News. "I feel like my sister just passed away yesterday when I found out the news again. It just reopened the wound. I didn't know what to think because I didn't expect it. I didn't know it was coming this soon. It's too soon." End quote.
We can debate if it's too soon or not. And you know me, I'm always up for that good discussion, Mike.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think it's probably too soon as well. But what disgusts me is how families keep finding out through the news or social media that people are being released like this.
I think they're supposed to be notified.
It's like the justice system just moves on to the next file. Families don't. They carry this every day.
Every day. Yep.
And it's just terrible that people find out on the news that a person who murdered their loved ones is walking free.
Yeah, there are other interesting cases to cover in this regard, and I have a few in the hopper. Tanya Nepinak's daughter, Jasmine, was 24 years old when the news about Lam's release broke. She found out through her Facebook feed, filled with news about Lam's release. Quote, "I think I'm still processing everything," she told reporters. Pimikikamak Cree Nation Council member Brenda Fogg did the arithmetic out loud for reporters. Lam had served 13 years for 3 women killed or believed killed: Lorna Blacksmith, Carolyn Sinclair, and Tanya Nepinak. 4 years and 3 months for each of the women, Fogg said. The justice system failed again. End quote. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew wrote a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney the following week. He called Lam's release disgusting. He asked the federal government to reconsider sentencing provisions and parole eligibility for repeat violent offenders, and called for legislation that would allow consecutive sentencing in cases involving multiple homicides. The grassroots organization Giganawe Nimananig, a word that translates as "we all take care of them," called Lam's release a devastating gap in Canada's justice system and echoed Wab Kinew's call for consecutive sentencing in multiple homicide cases. In May 2026, the parole board denied Lam's request to transfer out of his Ontario halfway house, ruling that he still presented an undue risk to society and that the relatively limited period he had spent in the community made a transfer premature. The board's language was careful and bureaucratic. Its conclusion was that Shawn Lam, now 66, remained dangerous. Tanya Nepinak's loved ones are still looking for her. Her family has held vigils every year on September 13th, the anniversary of the night she left her Sherbrooke Street home with $5 in her hand and walked toward a pizza restaurant a few blocks away. Her Aunt Sue Caribou has brought her drum to the Brady Road landfill and sung there. As we mentioned, Caribou has lost 7 members of her own family to murder and 2 more to disappearance. She has kept Tanya's name in front of the public for 14 years. In August of 2025, Premier Wab Kinew announced that the province would search the Brady Road landfill for Tanya's remains, but only after completing an active search already underway for Ashley Shingoose, a 30-year-old woman from St. Teresa Point First Nation who was one of 4 Indigenous women murdered by convicted serial killer Jeremy Skibicki in Winnipeg in 2022. We'll cover that story later. That search began in earnest in December 2025. By March 2026, the province was 4 months into the Shingoose search, with Wab Kinew describing the progress as promising. Workers had uncovered material from date ranges and trucking routes consistent with Shingoose's disappearance. The search for Tanya Nepinak, Kinew confirmed, would begin when the Shingoose search was complete. So that is progress, Kinew told reporters in March 2026. That said, we have to remember that there is a family here, the family of Ashley Shingoose. You think about her parents, you think about her kids, and what they're going through. It's just important that we keep that compassion for them in our hearts. Sue Caribou wrote a message on the back of a photograph of Tanya and brought it to the landfill during the Shingoose search. She left it there. Tanya Nepinak's daughter Jasmine told reporters what she wanted people to know about her mother. Quote, "She was a loving mom, a good person. She was just an all-around great person, and she doesn't deserve to be there." End quote. The corner of Ellis and Sherbrooke still stands. The West End still carries its grief. 3 women from the same remote corner of northern Manitoba disappeared from within a few blocks of that intersection in the span of 5 months, and one of them has never been brought home. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 431, Street of Tears, The Crimes of Shawn Cameron Lam. That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. We did not have any voicemails this week at the point of recording. We know there have been voicemails since, so you'll hear them soon. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. We do have some supporters this week. Donut money donor wise from Buy Me a Coffee. Jenny became a supporter, and Jenny says, "Sorry about Steve losing a pet is tough."
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny. We have a lot of people who are coming out
I
in
really
support.
appreciate that.
Yeah, it just blows my socks off.
Mike and I were talking when we weren't recording about, I was tired and Mike's like, "Are you getting better sleep?" And it's sort of it's a number of weeks in now. And it's, I was just saying that, some days I wake up and the very first thing I think of is, I wish Steve was here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then other days it's less so. And after I'm going through that process, right?
Yeah.
Of the thing. And, but hearing people calling in and saying sorry it's really meaningful to me. Thank you.
Leslie Hauk also became a supporter at Buy Us a Coffee. And Leslie says, "I was listening to today, and I'm truly saddened to hear Steve is no longer with us. Sending my sincere condolences as well as a note of appreciation to both Mike and Matthew.
Thank
I
you,
look
Leslie.
forward to the drop each week and feel like I'm sitting with friends when I listen. That means a lot."
You are.
Yeah, you guys are our friends. Yeah, absolutely.
As friends, Leslie, I'm sure I know you sometimes. Sometimes I make you laugh. That's what friends do.
Yeah, that's what friends do. And from PayPal, we have Sonia Rockwell. Oh boy, we didn't go back. We need to go back. Jenny. What does Jenny do and where is she from, Matthew?
I want to do Jenny and Leslie and Sonia together.
Okay, yeah, let's do that because I screwed up and didn't ask you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Sonia,
do that.
we have Sonia Rockwell as well.
Yeah, so Sonia says, "Love you, Mike and Matthew." But yeah, so what? So you say these three are together in some way?
Sonia is the lead singer and guitarist. Leslie is the bass guitarist, and Jenny is the drummer in a band called the Rockwells.
The Rockwells. Okay, all right. And what's the genre, Matthew? Because they rock well. I gotcha.
Of course,
I'm picking up. And where do they hail from? What place in the world does this rock band hail from? The Rockwells,
Tacoma,
Washington.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you, all of you. There's other good bands that are
the Rockwells. Jenny, Leslie, and Sonia are the Rockwells.
Yeah, I just think of L7 when I think of a girl band.
You think of what?
L7.
I don't know L7. Do you know Warpaint? That Warpaint is really good.
Warpaint? Okay.
Yeah. I saw them do a gig here at, I think the Rickshaw. Yeah.
Oh, Rickshaw is always fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Warpaint's really good. Look them up. Yeah.
I will. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this week's episode. So until next time, don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.